Today's guest is Dirk Meulenbelt. Dirk has a Master of Science in Artificial Intelligence and is a digital nomad. He recently founded based.guide, a startup that helps people move abroad. He's also a longtime enthusiast of critical rationalism, especially the ideas of David Deutsch and Karl Popper. He's organized the European edition of RADFest, a critical rationalism conference, and we are currently exploring together to organize a new one in 2026. I know Dirk from the critical rationalist world, where we share a deep interest in the human mind, the evolution of creativity, fun, agency, and performance optimization. All of which we'll hopefully touch on and get into today. And what I think will make this conversation interesting is that we both enjoy venturing into the outskirts of critical rationalism, the more half-formed ideas, more nuanced ideas that connect with critical rationalism rather than only sticking with and repeating the well-established parts of it. Dirk has pointed me towards several fascinating areas, like Lisa Feldman-Barrett's theory of emotion and the research on mirror neurons. So if you enjoy fresh, not yet fully crystallized ideas, I think you'll like this episode. Dirk, welcome to the show.
Yeah, happy to be here. I thought you already knew Lisa Feldman-Barrett.
No, I didn't.
I just dropped her name and her ideas on emotions, and it seemed like you were supporting me there as though you were an expert. I thought you had read it. I haven't even read the whole book. I've just kind of gotten her thesis from some podcasts and bits of her book.
Well, similar to me, but once you mentioned it, because it was so similar to how I already viewed emotions, I went on like a little deep dive with ChatGPT and some indeed podcasts and YouTube videos, and that's how I kind of formed my understanding. But it was on the fly. I didn't know her yet.
What was it again? It's an emotion is based on valence and intensity.
Yeah. So arousal is the axis from calm to dynamic and excited. That's the one axis, and the other axis is from positive emotions, I believe, to like all the way to negative emotions. And then those are the two axes or ingredients of emotions, and you can pinpoint wherever you want on that and construct a feeling out of it. So something is very excitable and negative, or something is very excitable and positive, and we label all these things different emotions. That's kind of what
I thought it was basically either positive or negative, or somewhere in between, and then strong or weak. So depression might be sort of a weak negativity where you aren't, you're just feeling a bit of a malaise. You don't want to get up, and then something like anxiety would be very strongly negative. Excitement would be positive and strong, and then maybe calm would be more like the positive side of the depression. You're sort of like, you also don't want to get up, but you're not unhappy. You're just chilling. And then all the emotions that we have are creatively constructed from this combination of feeling. And I think people have done experiments with this. I don't know exactly which ones, but I forget exactly which ones, but they put people in certain settings, and I think they try to elicit this kind of excitement, or like we should have to look this up, but I think there were some, like they gave people some kind of pills, or that they elicited certain emotions, and then whether this was interpreted as excitement or as frustration just depended on whatever situation they were put in.
Interesting. I think I want to just quickly pull this up as well, because I think it's a very fun topic.
When I was listening to her in a podcast, it connected with the Popper Deutschen ideas for me, because I studied psychology at some point, and I actually had a course on emotions. And there's this there's a researcher called, I think his name is Paul Ekman, who his ideas are that the emotions are hardwired, and we smile in every civilization in human history, and we look angry in the same way, and basically the emotions are evolved. And she basically flied in the face of that and saying, no, they're actually cultural artifacts based on a very two-dimensional signal that your body is giving out. Apparently, she said something like the Romans didn't even smile at each other. It's just something that came much later.
Interesting. I think, how would you describe emotions in like a Deutschian sense? Because I think of it as there's the feeling aspect, which is these two components that we talked about, and then there's the knowledge that creates them, and that's, maybe we call that the emotion. Is that a right categorization in your view?
Yeah, I think it's something like your body is giving you some very simple signals, like it's almost barking at you like a dog, and it's just it just has a a two-dimensional signal. So it's either saying good or bad, and it's either saying really good or really bad or somewhere in between. And it's up to you to figure out what the message is, and you read the situation. So the thing your body is sending you, or the message your body is sending you in a state of fear, is almost the same as a state of excitement, and it's up to you to decide. So I think people also watch horror movies or scary movies or go in roller coasters to experience these strong, like high valence, high intensity emotions, but they know in that situation they're safe. So they can interpret it as excitement rather than fear, or they may be interpreted as fear for just a moment. So you get to have these experience in a safe context. And then, of course, some people jump from mountains with these wingsuits, knowing that it is dangerous, and because they don't want to experience it in like a virtual reality or a movie, because then it's not dangerous, and that ruins it for them.
Exactly. Even though, I'm going to pull it up now because that will make it easier.
Yeah, we have
to
pull it up because I think I might be messing up. Because I think I must be making a mistake, because if we are interpreting whether something is positive or negative based on the situation, then the signal itself cannot already be positive. So what's she saying?
Actually, this is not from Barrett, but this is one that I'd like. It's the same two ingredients. So the axis valence is the unpleasant to pleasant axis, and then you have the activation axis, is with active, aroused to like passive or calm.
Right. But your body cannot already sending you the pleasant necessarily, because if you're watching a scary movie and you have a jump scare, that could be something you actually you're reinterpreting it. You're reinterpreting it as being pleasant.
Right. If we take indeed that example of the annoyed one, I think because it's like a combination of the active and negative, people would say, okay, this is an annoyed feeling, but the same individual could have the same sensation and say, this is not annoying, but this is exciting. Even though the perceived affect is identical, I think still the interpretation or knowledge that behind it, what emotion it is, can differ from person to person.
Yeah. I've done something like this myself, because I hate the sound of screaming children. I guess everyone does, and that's maybe why they have evolved that sort of pitch. And it used to annoy me to no end when there was some screaming kids on a plane or train or whatever, like some enclosed space that I have to be into. But then recently I thought, well, I kind of want people to have kids because the world needs to be populated, and I don't think you can just stop them from screaming occasionally. I don't want to stop people who have kids from traveling. Mm-hmm. So whenever this occurs, whenever this scream happens, I'm like, well, some people have kids, so I'm just less annoyed by it. I've reinterpreted the situation.
Yeah. So interesting. So the feeling is the same that you get, but you interpret it as something different.
I'm still annoyed, but I don't have this sort of the lingering annoyance afterwards. I just sort of let it. It's not something I would see. It's not an emotion I would seek out, but I've been able to reinterpret it, and maybe even seeing the beauty of it. It's like, oh, you have these children and they are just unencumbered yet by their expectations of the world around them, and they run around shouting because they're excited, or they cry because they feel bad, and it's like they haven't had the world filter yet, which is, that's another aspect that you can find interesting.
Yeah. And then I guess if we try to take it back to critical rationalism, the idea there is that all human knowledge is generated creatively. We come up with all our knowledge ourselves. It's never poured into us passively. We always conjecture it, and emotions are downstream of knowledge. In essence, emotions are ways that knowledge makes itself aware to our consciousness. So if you're scared, it's actually some knowledge internally saying, this is a risky situation that you're in. Here's a warning. And then it's giving you the sensation of fear. And from that sensation, you can then infer again what might have caused it. But as you say, you can then also come to the conclusion, oh yes, I feel this sensation, this fear, or in your case, the mild annoyance of noisy or screeching child. But I choose that this is actually not a warranted fear or signal, or I mean, it's valid, but I don't want to act on it. I'm not going to get actually annoyed by it, or I'm not going to do anything about it because, this situation is perfectly safe and fine, and I'm actually okay with it. So
yeah, there's some kind of like when you hear this from some kid, like there's something in me that's go like, "Fuck you, you stupid kid. Let me let me live." But then I think, oh well, but this kid doesn't have this notion yet. It's not annoying me. It's not trying to be well, maybe at some point kids will realize that what they are doing is getting a rise out of people, in which case it makes more sense to be a little bit, let's say, mad at them or more annoyed by it. In either way, I'm still not their parents, and I still don't have the control over them. So, I mean, yeah, what could I do? I could better just reinterpret it. And maybe I could move to another location, but sometimes you can't.
Right.
So yeah, okay. So I'm less annoyed by screaming children now because I see the beauty in people having children, and they're just gonna scream, especially when they're young. Maybe when they're older, they need to be taught not to do that.
Yeah, but does it also change your emotional signal? I think critical action.
It can. I was just thinking this could be a good segue to our shared idea on when you might want to use discipline to reach some of your goals.
Mm.
So, for instance, let's say you have a phobia of spiders or squares or heights. You can expose yourself to that fear, and at first you will have the bodily sensations, but then you interpret them. You tell yourself, this. I actually think spiders are pretty scary, but heights are, in many cases, you can just say I'm in a skyscraper that's built to even withstand earthquakes, so I'm fine. And you can stand there and you can feel the sweaty hands, and you can feel you can let it wash all over you, and reinterpret that as saying, well, okay, my emotions are wrong, or the signals I'm getting from my body are wrong because I'm not actually in danger. But if you do that, I mean, I don't know how many times you have to try this. I haven't done exposure theory, but with patients. But I imagine that if you do that once a week for 2 months, say, you won't have the bodily sensations anymore. So you went from the bodily sensations to an interpretation, but you turn around the interpretation and it kind of sort of went back in and overrode whatever is causing the bodily sensations. So you wouldn't have the sweaty hands anymore. So the reason I bring this up is because this was one of the reasons we agreed that occasionally using discipline to achieve a goal can be warranted. Discipline meaning you override some part of yourself saying, I don't want to do this. And then you say, well, actually I have a theory. My theory is that skyscrapers, or in many cases heights, aren't actually dangerous. And I'm going to override the no on the expectation that if I do this, let's say 10 times, I won't have my body complaining anymore, or my mind complaining. I'm not sure who's complaining in this case, but there's some kind of...
Yeah, the internal knowledge.
Right, yes.
Indeed. So what in the example of the child, I think that's an example of a very deeply ingrained or entrenched piece of knowledge. It's in our genes that elicits some strong emotional response because it's there, it's unconscious knowledge, it's quite hard to update. And especially in those circumstances, like even if you decide, and you did rationally decide, hey, this is actually the sound of the child crying is not that bad. Still, there's this emotion part coming up. So that means even though you have a new form of knowledge there, the old form of knowledge is still giving signals. And the way to, I guess, teach or adapt that old type of knowledge to not give those signals anymore is also, you can do that through discipline or training yourself over time that old signal is not warranted. And you just want to, by going through the motion and delaying your instant criticism of that feeling, not trying to push it away, but just accepting it, but telling yourself, hey, no, actually, this is fine, this is good. And if you do that a couple of times, I think the signal of the annoyance will keep diminishing.
Right. So you use discipline potentially, maybe for a bit of context, discipline has a very bad reputation in the critical rational spheres because if you apply discipline to your life, if you're saying things like no pain, no gain, what is this Jocko Willink saying, discipline equals freedom. If you live a life of discipline, you're essentially very often or even constantly getting a message from your mind that says, no, I don't want to do this, and you do it anyway, you might be furnishing yourself a life you don't want, which is tragic. And what you should really do is engage with the no and figure out why the no is a no, or conversely, why the yes is a yes if you're, I'd say, drug addicted or something like that. Compulsive behavior is engage with it and see if you can creatively, let's say, please all parts of your mind.
Yes.
And then you can get to a win-win. And if you override it, you can eventually get to a lose-lose, because, well, first you feel bad for overriding your no, and then you also might be steering yourself towards a life that you don't really want. It's not in service of your own interests, but perhaps someone else's, like the guru you are watching. Edwin and I have been thinking, is discipline always bad? And one of our conclusions is that, well, it can be good if you have a very good theory that the way you're overriding your emotions is temporary. And doing, for instance, exposure therapy when you have anxiety would be such a thing. Another could be, let's say, changing your sleeping pattern after jet lag or after traveling. Okay, I'm gonna sleep maybe 4 hours for 2 nights, but by getting up earlier, I will shift it eventually. So I'm applying discipline now, but I won't need it again a week from now.
Yeah, it's always a short-term measure if you do apply discipline, because, as you say, discipline has many downsides. It's basically you're forcefully shutting down the inner signals and saying, I'm not going to listen to you right now. And obviously, if you condition yourself to do this a lot, that is very toxic, because you'll never know exactly when you're in pain anymore. You're just going forward. You don't actually know. You're not in alignment with your own values and preferences at that point. So there's definitely a lot of harm in discipline, and we understand why critical rationalism therefore suggests more so this approach of taking seriously all sensations in your mind, all thoughts, all feelings. And I think even the definition that taking children seriously uses is to never act when still one part of your mind is active, and never override one part of your mind. So they're very, I would say, extreme or absolute in the sense that you should never try to overrule or override any sensation in your mind. But I think you and I came to the conclusion that it's not just in emergencies that you can do it, but there's actually a couple of scenarios that it makes sense. And one of them is...
Yeah, an emergency makes sense, because then you just don't have time to do introspection or therapy.
Exactly. Yeah. But there's more than that, because like you don't, for every little problem in daily life, want to do introspection, make like a full analysis of what's going on in the mind, and then take action from that. Quite often we just, like, for the mundane things like losing weight, I think you mentioned a couple of times already this example where that to like get in the flow or build the initial habit of being in a diet, you'll have to push through a couple of times. So for a week you kind of tell yourself, okay, even if I'm hungry, I'm just gonna keep going and push through. After that week, you're doing it because you think your signals will adapt, your emotions, your feelings will adapt to new normal of what you've told yourself is important. And at that point, you can then start saying, okay, I'm going to stop the discipline. I'm going to listen again to the signals of my body, and then kind of fine tune it from there.
Well, I'm losing some weight now. I'm trying to get rid of my belly, and I do this by only eating dinner. Or now that my father was visiting me here in Italy, only eating lunch a couple times. I the first couple days of going into only eating dinner is a bit rough, because I will be hungry in the afternoon. But after a couple days, it's just completely gone. I think this is, I'm not sure whether this is hormonal, but in either way, I have this theory. Okay, I struggle through this for maybe 2-3 days, and then I'll just only be hungry for dinner. And I'm not exactly sure what sort of therapy I'm supposed to do to avoid this 2 days of hunger. Like I might, like maybe someone who's very into critical rationalism might say, well, you need to want to lose weight more than you want to eat or something. But then I might say, well, I'm actually not all that bothered by this feeling. And I also know it's going to be gone in 2 days. So I'm not sure I see the value in this reinterpretation. On the other hand, though, let's say we take diet again as an example. There are many cases where diets work for a little while and people lose weight, but they gain it all back again because they did, in fact, need discipline to keep the diet going. And then once they hit their target weight, they just bounce straight back because they say, oh, I'm done. I'm done with the discipline. So they haven't created a new way of eating.
Yeah.
So that would be the danger of taking that approach.
That's a very good point, because if you don't, in fact, take it for just a short amount of time, but if, let's say, you apply discipline for your whole diet, you've not really instilled a new sustainable habit or a way of life. You haven't created new knowledge internally of like what is a way to eat that doesn't rely on constantly berating yourself and like whipping yourself into compliance. That's obviously unsustainable. I think there's more situations where just a short period of time where you delay criticism is useful. So like kicking a bad habit, I think we also discussed a couple of times. So if you want to, I guess, classical examples like stop smoking or something like this, it's going to suck in the short term. It's going to require some discipline in that sense. And then hopefully over time, this discipline will allow the signals to subdue it, make it more manageable to not approach it via discipline. But
right, yes. Delayed criticism is where we ended up. It's also, it's kind of delayed criticism is also maybe kind of preemptive criticism, where you say something like, okay, I'm going to quit smoking on the theory that it's very bad for my lungs and health in general. And maybe when you're still smoking, this like many people have like great plans for their life. Where it's like, oh, when I wake up tomorrow, then I'm going to do all these things. But then when it is tomorrow and you can also play video games or whatever, it's harder. So you're basically saying, okay, I'm going to feel very bad, but there's an end to it. So maybe the first week that I'm not smoking, I'll just, based on the theory that this is going to be tough, I'll just, let it go, just accept it. And then I'll delay the criticism till about after a week. So I imagine if you quit smoking, but it's still as tough a couple months in as it is the first couple of days, like you might need a different approach because you're essentially just setting yourself up to start smoking again at some point. But from what I understand, this is for almost every habit, it just gets easier and easier.
Yeah.
But not always, exactly. So the diet thing is very prominent. Many people bounce straight back.
I guess another mistake is that sometimes you apply discipline reflexively, so without even thinking about it. Sometimes when I'm working on something and I know that my mind getting distracted, I will just immediately push it back to the task at hand without like considering, well, what might I be wondering about, and is there something there? This is also a dangerous thing because, again, you're not taking the signal seriously. You've not made a conscious decision that you're going to apply discipline. You just did it. So this phase of having a conscious application that, okay, for this time period, for this window, I'm going to delay criticism, but after that, I will reflect on this experiment, you could say. That is also a key component of it. You have to make the decision.
Yeah. So we only accept it as a temporary patch.
Yeah. And you can also use it as like a little push to agency, if you think of it that way, because sometimes you just might not feel like doing something new, or at least you have some hesitations with doing something new because everything that's new is a bit different and can come with some risks and, negative experiences. So some people just shy away from it. So delaying criticism of doing new things also is a great way to get you going, because as we know, once you start acting, it becomes typically a bit easier and it's less scary. But that initial stage of like overthinking everything, like before you get in a cold shower, for instance, you might be like, your anticipation of it's going to be cold, it's going to suck, I'm going to feel this in this way. That's the bad part. It's not actually being in the cold shower. Then it's not that bad.
I hate cold showers, but they can be nice after a sauna.
Right. But
is there some benefit to cold showers other than?
I like to, I don't know for like health benefits per se. I personally have quite bad allergies. So there's a couple of techniques that kind of give me some like dopamine rush or hormonal reset, which seem to help with that. Like the Wim Hof breathing does that. And also in combination with a cold, it does help me sometimes when I have a really, really bad day. It's like, I don't know, it's like some reset of my system.
Well, that's again another theory you can apply. So if I go to a sauna, what I do is I'll go to a sauna, maybe 15, 20 minutes, go take a cold shower, get back in the sauna, go take a cold shower. If I do that for maybe a couple of like sessions in and out, I'll feel like I'm on ecstasy or something. But of course, the first time I go and stand in the shower, it's pretty rough. So I'm again applying just 20-second discipline to also sitting in the sauna just slightly longer than feels physically comfortable. I feel like that helps the ecstasy effects after.
Yeah, and those are all like deliberate trade-offs as well. So they're, even though it's like discipline in the sense that you're ignoring a signal in the short term, you've still made this decision that it's worth it, like the benefits that I will get later outweigh it. And some of those benefits can just be experimental, like I think it might.
Right.
But still, you're like you're approaching your life as like little experiments and applying discipline in that way, rather than as like a crutch or some steamrolling apparatus that you just use.
Yeah.
I think that ties nicely also into Fun Criterion. You want to go there?
Sure.
Yeah. So this notion of like no coercion and taking the mind seriously is also, I think, integral to David Deutsch's Fun Criterion. I think you and I have both tried to grasp it, and we've encountered some counterintuitive meanings to it. First of all, there's the part where it's like taking seriously what's happening in the mind, and when you notice discomfort or something wrong, like problematic, then that's a very strong criticism of the activity you're doing, and you should reflect on that. That is a great interpretation, a great takeaway from it. So it's a mode of criticism, and David Deutsch often says this. But he also sometimes describes fun as like pursuing experiences that you enjoy. And I wrote an article where I said, I don't think that's the spirit of a Fun Criterion, but at the same time, I know he says sometimes things that sound a lot like it. So what is your current thought process there?
Well, I think there are actually two versions of the Fun Criterion. One is the one you just described, which is that you want to take your negative emotions kind of seriously and just not do things because your guru or whatever said that you should. And likewise, you take positive emotions seriously in the sense that they might be steering you towards something beneficial to you. Because, I mean, let's say we take the brain as a problem solver, then it might be steering you towards where problems might be solved for you by giving you some pleasure for doing it. For instance, I'm here with my sister and she says, well, all I want to do all day is work on my photos and improve my photography. So then I say, well, that's just clearly your brain or your mind is telling you this, like, this is fun, you should do this. And it doesn't seem harmful. Try to steer your life in that direction, at least for now. And
exactly.
If you're young, this is like maybe what people refer to when they say you follow your passion. What they might be saying is actually, well, just go and do it, what's fun. And then if I think Lully and Deutsch do have a more precise definition of fun, like they don't necessarily say go out and do loads of drugs and
because that's the risk, right?
Get drunk and speed and on everywhere because it's dangerous and it's not lasting. But something's more wholesome, like it pleases your being, is it right? You just feel happy about it tomorrow as well. It's just not as, again, like we're dealing with the aspect of time here, whereas we want it says the inverse of the discipline. We don't want the fun necessarily the next 20 seconds. We want it, for the week at least. But I think there's another version of the Fun Criterion that Deutsch keeps alluding to when he talks about it, which is that occasionally you should let go of an explicit idea that you have of how things should be done in order to explore something fun, something new, something odd. And so he gives an example in one podcast where he says there's this chess player called, is it Ginger GM?
Yeah, I can read it for you if you want.
Well, I think I remember it well enough. So he says something like...
Okay, good.
Yeah, well, you can read it, sure.
Yeah, so the direct quote is, he often says things like, I'm tempted to play this move, I know I shouldn't, no, I can't resist, I'm going to play it. And in the Fun Criterion video, I described fun as when your explicit and inexplicit ideas align, and here his explicit ideas as a commentator say, don't do it, but his inexplicit ideas want to play the move because it's fun. This isn't necessarily a contradiction. His explicit ideas as a commentator are about what's most likely to lead to a win, but fun is harder to verbalize.
Yeah, this seems to me a Deutsch saying, occasionally, live a little. So this Ginger Jam has this idea in his mind, like he shouldn't play this move. He knows he shouldn't play this move, but he's like, I'm just gonna do it. So he might have an explicit idea that playing that move isn't going to let him win, but he's like, I'm just gonna do a move that is, I'm just gonna do a bad move because I can, and he might learn something there, and some cheeky part of his brain is saying, why don't you
playful, right?
Try it? Yeah. So I think in that interpretation of the Fun Criterion is like is actually saying like, let go of some explicit idea that you have that is saying don't do this, and just live a little.
Yeah, or
try something.
Don't put the explicit knowledge on a pedestal and think that is the end all be all, because there's also inexplicit knowledge which can equally be meaningful and true, and listen to both of them, or at least maybe he says even here, don't listen to explicit knowledge in this case and go more for this intuitive feeling of doing what's fun, or what will lead to an interesting game, or what might teach me something. It's interesting because it's hard, like that raises the question, when should you do that, because your intuition is not always right. Yeah,
but maybe a good summary of that version of the Fun Criterion is like, let go of some constraint that you think you have, or that you think is imposed on you, in order to explore something silly, fun, odd, different, interesting. And I tied this back into art history. If I look at art history, it seems to me it's just like throwing away constraints, occasionally throwing back in a new one. But it's like, this is what if, like you're drawing and you're like, what if everything's a cube? Or what if I stop drawing only Jesus? What if I don't make the face look realistic? What if I just make it a bit vague?
Is your point that all these things lead to knowledge creation and progress in knowledge in some way? And that's a reason? Yeah.
But just my very, very simple interpretation of art history is just occasionally art is thinking, what if I just tried this new thing? So you take the rules as there are, and I think they sort of, if I walk through a typical art gallery, like with the old art, it seems like they sort of went from drawing religious scenes accurately to drawing important scenes accurately to drawing, let's say, important scenes slightly less accurately, or drawing unimportant, like everyday things. And it's like at each step, I think someone was like, why do we do Jesus all the time? Why not just, do the old philosophers?
Yeah.
And then someone's like, why don't we just, why not just draw my mom? Or some prostitute, as has happened many times. And then people were outraged, but they were also excited because it was new. And this seems to be the kind of, like, just let go of some constraint, of some rule that exists in the art community about how you should paint your painting.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that's actually a good way to find new approaches that work to create knowledge, because so creativity is obviously, it's universal, it's unbounded, but and it can be open-ended, but it's very hard to do if you have a complete blank slate and nothing to work with. You want to have some scaffolding, some ideas, like you said, rules or structures of like and within that, then you can innovate because you have these constraints, and then you can come up with novel ways of doing it. But at some point,
you can throw away a constraint, but you can also add one. So if you're a kid and you're like, the floor is lava, it's like saying, okay, I can't stand on the floor. So what would I do if I can't stand on the floor? And then you have to stand on the chair and then find your way from the chair to another chair and find your way,
Right. And there's this point when so when your current, I guess, solution space has kind of become saturated in the sense that it's not really interesting anymore, you're not making a lot of progress. At that point, it might be interesting to add or remove a constraint just to open up a completely different avenue for exploration and for progress. And you're saying that is also a form maybe of the Fun Criterion, like noticing when it's a nice time to unleash that next step.
It's also a way in which I think creativity can work, generally speaking.
Yes.
Because you're almost throwing away the rules willy-nilly. It's like you're open to even throwing out bad rules. Like you can actually stand on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Like the floor is not actually lava. But
Yeah.
what if? What if it's lava? And
Yes.
then you get to a whole new way of problem solving that maybe like an LLM wouldn't do, because the floor isn't lava and there's nothing in the data suggesting that the floor is dangerous to stand on. So why would you consider the floor lava?
Yes. Yeah, this is also why this like fun epistemologies that are based on axioms tend to, I guess, also not really come to new conclusions very often, because they're just always trying to reconcile a new knowledge with the previous, and it all has to be logically coherent. Yeah, any new idea has a lot of boundaries and restrictions and rules around it, whereas critical rationalism is more open about knowledge creation is open-ended, can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to reconcile with a specific breadth of knowledge. As long as it fits within the constraints of the laws of physics, have at it.
Yeah, you can just ignore the rules.
Yeah, can just ignore the rules. That's an interesting one. And also,
ignoring the rules is really fun, right? So kids love to be cheeky. Like our case from earlier, like they might make loud noises because they know they're not allowed to do it. It's fun.
Yes.
Let's get a rise out of these stupid adults in their serious lives. Let's just start screaming and see what happens.
Yeah. I think in evolutionary psychology, it's always reasoned that is a rational behavior because it's explorative. So you're just trying something new and finding new tools or ways around obstacles, and that's the benefit of exploration. At least in animals, it kind of tends to be this way. Do you think that is accurate?
Yeah, but the thing is, there's sort of infinite ways, and you can try something new. So you have to, in this space of ideas, we can kind of reduce everything to variation, selection, and attention. So the idea is, okay, we're going to try something new. So we're going to vary something such that later we can perhaps select a better way of doing something or come to new conclusions about ways in which we might play a chess game. And we might get there by trying a move we think is actually bad, because, it might actually turn out to be a good move. Or even if the move is not supportive of winning, it might still teach us avenues of chess that would otherwise be unexplored, because the game doesn't typically go in that direction. But because you are following the fun in that sense, so you have variation and attention. So there are infinite ways in which you could draw your attention to a new move. Like Ginger Jam could also just throw off all the chess pieces from the board, like haha. Kids might also do, just to see what happens. He might be playing digitally, but it probably is playing digitally most of the times. He can't do that, but there he could turn off his computer. But he's not doing that. He's doing a weird move. So there's something with the fun criterion that is okay. It is focusing your attention somewhere that might be interesting. How that happens, I have no idea.
That's a good one.
It's definitely, he's not just doing any sort of thing willy-nilly, trying any sort of new way of chess.
Exactly.
He's trying something very, like something is jumping out there, or with the artist examples, like, they're not varying. And actually, some artists have done this. There's this Colombian artist called Botero, and he's basically, his whole invention is like, what if everyone's fat? Yeah, there's a Botero museum in Bogota, and it's basically, if you look at his paintings, it's like everyone's fat.
And that opens up different creative avenues. So I think this is interesting.
You can be silly in that way, and he did, and it kind of made a whole career out of it. But it's kind of funny.
Because there is just things about creativity that we don't understand yet. And one of these things that I think you alluded to is this non-randomness of it. So it is a recombination of existing knowledge and novel arrangements and hopefully coming up with some new knowledge. But it's not just that. There's something non-random and targeted to it. And I think attention is a way to conceptualize that.
Yeah. So evolution just does everything.
Yeah.
Or at least appears to be doing everything.
Yeah.
But humans do get to new solutions quicker.
Yes. But even biological evolution has maybe a component to this, because we still don't know how to properly run an evolutionary algorithm without it getting stuck in local maximums. So
you told me that. I'm not sure I'm not an evolution expert. I just understand it in the sense of variation and selection. And it makes it either changes little things by mutation, and it combines things through sex.
Yes.
But it doesn't really say, okay, we're going to fix the nose now or something like that. That's the environment does it by accident almost. Whereas we humans,
Indeed.
we can say, okay, we're going to try and come up with a solution to this specific problem.
I guess maybe it's something like if evolution gets stuck in some niche, that there's some mechanism that creates the variation in different places or tries more things at some point, just so that it will no longer be stuck. I don't know exactly how
do we
to...
have an example of evolution getting kind of stuck and then unstuck? Most species most species have died, haven't they? Just like they just died.
Yeah, well, that's true.
I remember I listened to you and Dennis discuss on your podcast this week, and I remember you two talked about it. So he said something like, it's actually so he thinks creativity is an evolutionary program.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why I think...
So the attention, if I understand his approach, then all the ideas are created in the mind, and then what we think is attention is actually the better ideas sort of bubbling up to consciousness, so to speak. And then the fun, follow the fun might be go to these ideas that might be right, or...
I think to Dennis's point, it is if creativity, if human creativity is also just a form of evolution, which I think we think, and it operates on a very similar mechanism, namely self-replicating ideas in the idea pool that we all have in our minds, and some of them some of them stick around longer, and some of them are more useful to the mind and therefore to the body in general. Therefore, they stick around. If that's the case, then maybe what is unique about our creativity or our evolution might also be inherent in, or a component of biological evolution that we don't yet understand. That it is not just blind variation selection. I'm not saying like Lamarckism is real or something like that, but we've not been able to model this. I think Brett Hall has a good article on this. I'll link it in the description.
I'm not sure whether to call it directed, to call mutations, or directed variation, but I've been reading some about the history of language, and according to Daniel Everett, we've had some kind of language for about 2 million years. And he gives some examples in his book where you can have cultural evolution going alongside of biological evolution, such that they sort of strengthen each other. So for instance, if there's a particular tool that is useful in an environment, then if you evolve such that you can hold that tool better, then you have an advantage.
Yeah.
So in the case of language, this is how he thinks that we have evolved speech. So we actually started signaling first and then speech later.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think the tool framing is the right way to put it. Because it's in favor of the genes for humans to be more adaptive and capable of surviving in the wild. So therefore, those traits also get selected for by the organism. And yeah, like you say, the initial form of creativity, most likely, I cannot see another way of it, was inexplicit. It was just like hand gestures and like, hey, there's a tiger on that side, watch out, So you're signaling understanding and explanations to each other without having like language in that sense. Do you think that's already explanations at that stage, or would you think that maybe that's a different form of knowledge?
Well, I think so. I think explanations will have to be expressible in some kind of language or code. But it's let me see. I put this sort of granularity on Veritula somewhere. Let's see if I can find it.
Oh yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think there's a difference between having an understanding, and an understanding can be inexplicit, and possessing explanatory knowledge, which is actually expressing that idea. So one example would be you understand the grammar of English, and in our case, Dutch. But I think you would be hard pressed to say that I don't understand Dutch. But there are many aspects of Dutch that I found as my girlfriend is learning Dutch that I actually didn't know. We're saying, instead of saying we are dancing the Dutch, we're saying we are at the dancing, which was I only became conscious of that as I was like explaining this to my girlfriend. I was like, what the hell that is what we're saying? Yeah. So I think something new has appeared, but I've been saying this since I was a kid. So I would say that I understand that way of phrasing, but maybe I didn't have explanatory knowledge of it yet. And what linguists do, if you read a book on how they're trying to get to the nature of, let's say, adverbs or adjectives, what they do is they put sentences down and they put an asterisk in front of the one that they know is ungrammatical. But they already know, because there's something in their head that understands that it's not right, but they don't know why. So they have an understanding, but not explanatory knowledge yet. Well, and then they might at some point come to an explanation, and it could be wrong.
Yeah, but
I think, so I just wanted to hold that against, because I have criticism of this idea as well, which is that it's not very clear, like, at what point does it become an explanation? So I let GPT put this together, but it's like, let's imagine you go from a didactic paper in plain English with examples, edge cases, into a concise technical note with formal definition, invariants, and pseudocode, let's say, about a program, for instance. Like, if you just put everything there to make a person understand what, piece of software you might have written. And then you can go from that, and you say, you remove the part where you explain the code in English, but you still leave the comments within the code. And then at some point you take the comments out of the code, but it's still in Python, which is fairly easy to read. And then at some point you say, well, it's no longer in Python. It's actually in, like, what do people use to programming that is much more difficult, like BASIC or whatever.
Low level.
And and at some point it's just zeros and ones. But to me, there's not an obvious point where it's like, now it stops being explanatory. But it definitely, I feel like it has gone from explanatory, which is the pseudocode, the code with comments, and the explanation of what the program is doing, to zeros and ones.
I think Bart has helped me understand this as well. Because in a sense, I agree with you that knowledge is explanatory when the explanation is clearly in writing, or at least can be inferred and also communicated easily to other people because it's expressed in a language or a code. But on another way, all human knowledge is explanatory, or at least the ones that we come up with our creativity. It's always like an explanatory relationship that occurs in our minds. Like, even if it's inexplicit or unconscious, it's still like this and this leads to that and that in that scenario. And that's still an explanation. It can be a very bad one based on like a justificationism, but it's still explanatory because that's the only mode of knowledge creation that we have. But when Deutsch explains explanations, and in his book says it, he's really talking about, I think, specifically explicit explanations, about the ones we can already articulate in this causal language or in this symbolic language. And Bart then pointed me towards a definition. I think you can recognize explanatory knowledge because it explains its causal mechanism and its causal effects in this code. DNA, for instance, it does have code. It says, or it can program something to do something, but it does not explain how it works or what it does. It only has the effect.
So how would you call what would you call the knowledge I have of Dutch or English before I'm able to explain why a particular sentence is grammatical or ungrammatical to you?
Inexplicit explanatory knowledge. So it's inexplicit, and the only way you can explain it to someone else is by trying to put it in words, to approximate it in words via explicit knowledge.
What makes it explanatory then?
I find it a difficult question. I don't think you can say this at some point when everything is described in a certain way that is an explanation. I don't think you can ever see on a paper when something is an explanation or not. It always requires an individual, an AGI, to read it and then infer the explanation. So I don't think the level of emergence can ever be in writing directly. But what you can do is say, oh, that's clearly not an explanation because it doesn't describe the causal mechanism for how it works, or it doesn't do this and this and this. You can look at an explanation and say that's a good explanation, that's a bad explanation, that's not an explanation at all. If you're looking at DNA code, you can do all of that with your creativity, but you can never say how is the explanation now not, because it's still always the creativity in your mind generating this idea.
So what would be an example of non-explanatory knowledge?
DNA. That's, I think, the only real example of it. That we have the knowledge created by something other than human creativity is non-explanatory knowledge.
But wouldn't it still have the components that you ascribe to explanatory knowledge? Like some implicit idea of what causes what? So what causes a phenotype that's more likely to
I think that
survive and get laid?
I think it's a bit more dumb. It's DNA only has value in the sense that it can be read out by an organism, but there's no creativity. It's just like running a computer program on a computer. That doesn't mean there's an explanation necessarily at play. It just means it's executable. So you've got executable ideas or knowledge, but that is not that directly explanatory.
So you're saying only if it comes from humans, then
only if it's generated by.
But imagine I write a proper evolutionary algorithm. It makes variations of ideas in a certain book, and I just let it come up with new ideas and have them all pile up, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be producing explanatory knowledge?
I mean, there's two ways of looking at it.
It's working like the DNA, so it's just making small changes to existing ideas, and then I just put it out into the world. But the original is an explanation, because that would be a book written by a person, and I just let go of I just unleash some algorithm that just changes a couple words here and there. The result is still an explanation, right? But the process is dumb.
Yeah. Yes.
Or would you say that because I have programmed that with the idea that maybe the change of the one word doesn't
I wouldn't say that.
Explanation-ness?
Let me see how I can best approximate it. So, okay, there's two ways of looking at it and defining it. I think the first is like what created the knowledge. If it's a human, it's explanatory knowledge, but it could still be a bad explanation. It could still be dogmatic or very vague and inexplicit or unconscious even. And if non-human entity made it, then it's non-explanatory.
But that just sounds racist and doesn't define to me what explanatory is. Also, you just say, well, there's some description of causality there. I actually asked Deutsch this at the Q&A at the Red Fest in 23. I asked whether an explanation always has a cause. And he said, well, no, you can't always have a causal description because, for instance, the Big Bang theory doesn't have something that causes.
Oh, yes. I remember that. Yeah.
But I think a lot of people find this very unappealing about it.
Yeah, and I do agree that, but it does rely on we don't really understand creativity yet, so I cannot really distinguish yet creatively generated knowledge from non-creatively generated knowledge. So that's all what I'm saying, that there's a way to look at knowledge in categorization of generated by creativity or not. And that often gets mixed up with learning how to recognize what a good explanation is. And that's something that David Deutsch, of course, added to epistemology, where he said it has to be hard to vary. It has to explain its causal mechanisms. Nothing has to be frivolous, at least, or it has to have range. There's a lot of properties. He wouldn't never say it like that, I know. But there's a lot of properties that we can look at.
He calls them statements. He calls them statements. That seems to me like it's already at least expressible. I've been using the word expressible.
Yeah, but that's still talking about knowledge is there, but I'm not sure the special thing is in what was written down, or if it's inside the AGI, the human or the creative entity that is then still creating this understanding in themselves.
What would you say? How would you categorize intuition? I'm very good. So let's say I have been watching football for decades, and I can tell from the moment that the soccer player is going to kick the ball for penalties. I know it's gonna go in. Well, I can probably do better than chance. I can probably get good at this. But do I really have the explanation then? Or you're playing tennis, as Deutsch gives this example, you're playing tennis and then you say, oh, this ball's going to go off or out or whatever you call it in tennis. And you don't know. You can't explain, okay, my brain is calculating this trajectory of the ball and the speed and all that is...
Yeah, he says you can only, after the fact, try to approximate it with an explanation. If you can't do that, then it's inexplicit knowledge that's driving the show. But that inexplicit knowledge still had to be created in some way. And I think the only way we humans can create knowledge is creativity, and that creates explanations. And some of them are inexplicit, some are explicit, and some are unconscious. And that's how I see it.
So is it all creativity? Isn't some just basic statistics? Do we
I don't think so.
Do we learn walking creatively, for instance?
Yeah, I think so. I think because we learn walking very different than animals, for instance, or most animals actually can walk straight away or very quickly because they have this very much hard-coded pre-programmed genes that tell them how to do so, and like a little range in which they can apply like reinforcement learning or like do that. But for humans, it's all like creative. If you look at a baby learning how to crawl, they all do it differently. There's like one age at which most babies learn to crawl in a certain way. Now it's super diverse. Some learn later, some learn sooner. Some like scoot with their butt on the floor and push their legs with their hands, and some are on their knees in weird postures. So I think the knowledge creation happening in humans has been almost completely been reduced to just creative knowledge.
Right. Okay. So in your view of this, then, if I am a linguist and I'm trying to figure out why a particular sentence is not grammatical, I would be making an explanation that's already in my mind explicit, right?
Approximated. So I don't know if you're like pulling it up or requesting it via an API or something, or if you're just trying to like guess what it might be. I think more.
But
more
that
the
process
second
itself is that's a creative process itself, right? So I would be creating an explanation of an explanation?
I think so. I think that's accurate to say. But it all depends on largely on semantics. So in one sense, I believe that all human knowledge is explanatory. So that's why I will always say it's an explanation. But in another sense, I know that we only treat an explanation as an explanation once it is, like you say, expressible, once it has certain components of like describing what it does or how it works. So there's two things kind of conflicting in my mind when we talk about it. I don't know exactly which one we're talking about at which point.
Right. Well, my understanding is that we have knowledge, which we could have understanding of something. And to me, it becomes explanatory knowledge once it is expressed in some intelligible form. And the border is a bit vague, as I try to show with my example of the explanation in English of what the program is doing, to just having the code and then at some point just having,
Yeah. Because it also leads to the question, okay, then what is required to read out the explanation? Like, is there a difference there? Because even the zeros and ones can be read out.
Imagine we made a DNA interpreter. Then would it then be explanatory?
We made a DNA interpreter.
Yeah, it's just like it spits out exactly the sort of things it's coding for. And of course, exactly, I'm not a biologist, but DNA codes a certain person, but it doesn't always exactly come out in one way. So we'd have to explain, okay, this can, but twins from, what do you call them, monozygotic or something?
But there's also
they come out very similar, at least for the looks. So let's say we take the looks part, and then we have an interpreter and say, well, it's going to make this kind of face, and it's going to make this kind of face because these and these and these and these genes are interacting. And I'm not sure what the exact process is. Something how are genes turn into a human at some point with proteins and. I forget the process. I saw it in a Cosmos episode at some point, but I forget the mechanism.
Protein transcription or something like that. But that's what they.
It could be a good question to ask Deutsch if we get to ask him.
I would love that.
Yeah, you can say, okay, well, is all the knowledge explanatory or just the part that we can express? I don't know.
It's a good question.
My tentative idea is that explanations have to be expressible.
Yeah, I like that in a practical sense. I think you should only be able to talk about explanations if they are expressible, and that's when they make sense to like use and bring up in discussions with someone and use as an argument for like what to do or tell yourself what to do. Only when they're expressible, I think they make sense to follow. What do you think?
Yeah, so I look at the work of a linguist as explaining the knowledge that is in their mind, or explaining the understanding. And what exactly understanding is also a bit tough. Like, I speak a bit of Spanish. Do I understand it? I need a bit more time to express myself and read it.
Well, one thing I like to think about is, I don't know, so Deutsch talks about meme plexes. So like a whole set of memes that all kind of work together, maybe to enforce some social norm. For instance, he uses this for the anti-rational memes that kept societies static. But I also like to think in explanation plexes. So sometimes it's not as simple as we have one type of knowledge that's teaching that's telling us how to swing a baseball bat. There's so many explanations that some of them are inexplicit, some are explicit, some are located, I think, purely in the nervous system, some in our mind. And at some point they come together and you try to approximate it or discuss it as if it's an explanation or as if it's an explanation, I guess. For instance, when your coach tells you, hey, hit it a bit more like this because of that, you're acting as if there's just one thing going on and you should do it a slightly different way. Maybe this is also a way to approximate understanding. Understanding to a sufficient degree is where you have a very good explanation for a lot of the explanation for the entire explanation plex, or for a subset of the explanations in the explanation plex. Well, if you can explain a lot of them, then your understanding is at a high degree, and if you cannot explain many of them, then your understanding is quite low degree.
Yeah, I think of understanding as something like it doesn't necessarily have to be explanations, but it has to be to some degree versatile. If I can only say a couple of sentences and interpret or understand. Well, I have to use the word again now. But if I only, I can only infer the meaning of, let's say, 4 sentences in Spanish, and I can only say 4 sentences in Spanish, but I have no way of combining them, or I have no knowledge that allows me to recombine my thoughts into new sentences, then I would say I haven't understood Spanish. I would just basically memorize I would have some facts.
Yeah,
but no understanding.
Indeed.
And then maybe I can go from facts to understanding by essentially learning Spanish or another language. And then to become a very effective teacher of that language, I would have to turn at least some of that into explanations. So in English, I could be using the grammar correctly, but I would say, oh, well, actually, if you lived in a place, but you live there no longer, you say you lived there. But if you still live there, you say, I have lived there. That's what you learn in school. But I think a lot of English speakers may not even know consciously that they don't have the explanation, but they do it correctly.
Interesting. So yeah, there's definitely this distinction between explanatory and knowledge and factual knowledge. At least Deutsch does make this distinction. I don't think he maybe says factual knowledge, but he says some things are bad explanations because they don't explain shit. They're just like, this leads to that, and it's a rule of thumb, you know.
I think he defines just knowledge as like ideas with power, with causal power.
Yeah, with causal effects.
So just knowing a fact, like knowing one word, is knowledge. Like if you know the word for beer, you can go quite a long way in many holidays.
Yeah, and this is also where like there's definitely big differences between just being able to pass a test in school and knowing all the answers because you've memorized them, versus understanding them and understanding the mechanisms behind it, and then why multiplication works this way, as opposed to memorizing the multiplication table or memorizing a subset of a formula without any idea of how it works.
Yeah, I think there's an example of this. I don't know any physics, but I did read Richard Feynman's memoirs. Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. Yeah. And at some point he goes to, so I forget that, I can't reproduce the details because I don't understand physics well enough, but at some point he was teaching Brazilians a certain, they already knew the formula.
Yeah.
But then when he said something like, look out to the ocean, see how the light behaves, what's going on there, and they had no answer. But they already did have the formula for it, but they just didn't know how to connect that real world situation to what they had memorized. So they had knowledge, actually quite powerful knowledge, because, well, you could apply that knowledge to explain what's going on there in the ocean with the light, but they didn't know how. So they had knowledge, but no understanding. And I'm very vague on how explanatory their knowledge is, because maybe if you ask, I think he asked them like, okay, explain the formula, and they would go, well, this and this happens, and then that happens, and we can calculate exactly. And then he goes, okay, well, what's happening there? But they didn't know how to connect that.
That's a really cool example, because in the Fabric of Reality, in the introduction, Deutsch does say that even a formula is just a condensed form of storing facts, and memorizing a formula, for instance, like what these guys did, is never going to amount to you understanding all the knowledge that is, or being able to interpret or understand all the knowledge in the world, because the body of facts just keeps growing. Even with formulas, you would never be able to encapsulate everything. What you really need is understanding, because understanding is universal and it has reach, and you can build new explanations on top of it. And it can, with the reach component, it's like, yes, you can do the formulas on paper, but you can also look at the water outside and tell me what's happening when it's bouncing off. So if you have an explanation or an understanding of it, that opens up. So there's an efficiency gain there as well.
Yeah.
But it's hard to demarcate. I think.
Yeah, I don't have the answers yet. But so we have some kind of factual knowledge, then we have knowledge, understanding, explanations, and then can the explanations be inexplicit?
Yeah.
I think the jury's still out.
Yes.
I've seen Crit Rats say, no, well, Dennis in his book, functions are explanations. And then now I've been making the best case I could that, the explanations have to be expressible. But then came up with some criticism to that. So we don't know yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting one.
We're going down the Dunning-Kruger curve with respect to critical rationalism. Hopefully we can ascend it at some point too and come up with some contributions to.
Speaking of which, you were in Redfest USA this year, and I believe you.
It was very nice.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it's amazing how Logan can get all these people from all around the world go to Philadelphia.
I agree. It's a quite niche world, and in the sense of, I think there's only couple hundred people that are knowledgeable and verbal or expressive about critical rationalism in the world, but still it's a rather tight-knit community, and especially Conjecture Institute and Redfest and all the other work Logan is doing is really bringing that together, which is cool to see. And there were many different talks at this edition, weren't there?
Yeah, there were about two full days of talks. Wow. And some Q&A. So basically everyone who attends can sign up for a talk. And there were some more famous people giving talks. Well, David Deutsch was there for a Q&A. We also have, Michael Schellenberger, if I remember his name correctly.
Oh, and the journalist, right?
Yeah, I think he's like a science writer.
Yeah.
I don't know him very well.
And of course I think you gave the very last presentation. Wasn't that the case?
Yeah, just before Deutsch came on. But it was all it was very neatly organized, so there were no hiccups, and I think Jesse and Logan organized it very well.
I would love to get into what you presented there, because I think that there's a step in creativity, or in how creativity evolved, that we don't quite understand. It's like how we went from the simple meme parsing and transmission that other animals have, like monkeys or apes being able to manipulate tools in certain ways, or birds trying to communicate with one another via calls, to this form of creativity, of universal understanding and be able to signal across boundaries, basically anything. So this is a big jump that we have to explain, because it happened in evolution. I think I agree with you. It's not just one big jump. There's probably some intermediate things we're still missing.
Yeah, exactly. So you're genetically very similar to chimpanzees and gorillas, but if you leave chimpanzees and gorillas alone in their natural habitat and you fly around space for 1,000 years and you come back, it probably looks exactly as you left them. But for humans, I mean, you could do the same thing and maybe you come back and they've killed each other, or maybe they do live still in the same habitat, but it's possible you come back and you find a mega city. And the question is like, what happened there? Like how it must have been something small with great consequences. And in the beginning of Infinity, Deutsch quotes a paper by Richard Byrne, where he tried to answer the question of how do primates learn new behaviors. Mm-hmm. And he found that what they do is they parse statistically the behaviors from their peers, from their parents. So what the parents do is they use sticks to get a little ants out or a little food out, and they also fold nettles in a way that they can eat without getting injured. And they they parse these statistically into behaviors that are also, there are like, what you call them, bidextrous, basically they're small physical behaviors that are already in their evolved repertoire. And in that way, they learn pretty complex culture in many cases, using sticks, folding these nettles in very smart ways, or apparently smart ways. But once you dig a little deeper, it turns out that what they do is they need a lot of time to copy these memes, and also they make very silly mistakes. So what they do is they throw away sticks that are blunt on one side but are actually still sharp on the other. So we would never do that. Like the stick's fine, just turn around the stick. And also what they do with the nettle processing, and I think Deutsch has said this various times on podcasts as well, is that if they're injured, they never change the behavior in a way that doesn't use their injured thumb, for instance. So they, even though like what they're doing is applying pressure, they never figure out, okay, I can apply the pressure with the palm of my hand or with another finger.
Yeah.
They just keep hurting themselves. So what they seem to lack is some kind of understanding, let alone an explanation. The problem is, like, it's at some point they can't learn more complicated memes because they already are loading their memory with the memes that they are learning, because essentially what they're doing is they're learning the meme in the way that we learn the alphabet. So the alphabet can't really be reduced any farther or any further. So we just do I, B, C, D, and like, what's the 12th letter of the alphabet? Like, I don't even know. I'd have to like drum it up. So it's just like, we just put it in memory as a sequence. Yes. And you might play a game, say, oh, I'm going on a trip and I'm taking this and this and this. So it's very memory heavy. And something happened such that if you want to teach a child how to get ants with a stick, you just go like, oh, here's a stick. You just put it in, and they go like, all right. Right. So, exactly. So the question is, how did we go from throwing away good sticks, where you already had to watch your parent perform something hundreds of times before learning it, to go like, that's the question. That's the big jump. And I've been trying to come up with what might have been, what might have gone on there. Deutsch says there, knowledgeable imitation depends on successfully guessing explanations of what the other person is trying to achieve and how each of his actions contributes to that. But so the apes, they throw away their sticks, and then humans, they can just in one go understand what's going on.
Yes.
And so this is kind of the what I'm thinking about at night, like what happened. And the simplest way of saying what I have come up with is that we've come up with a kind of a meme compression algorithm. So what the mistake that the apes are making is they're storing too much. They're storing every behavior separately instead of some explanation, or at least like a summary. So maybe in that sense we can combine the idea of let's say you're saying the linguist already has an explanation of the language, and I'm saying it still needs to come up with it, but whatever knowledge is underlying their understanding of language at least is sort of summarizing the language in a way, because we can create basically infinitely many sentences, because we can recombine the words. So they cannot have stored the meaning of every sentence. They have some summary of what happens when you combine concepts according to the rules of the language.
Because I think the key insight is that these apes or the chimpanzees, they don't have concepts of words. Words can be context dependent and be switched out. And in humans, if I use one word, I can use it in 20 different sentences. It will all make sense. But these chimpanzees, they only store sentences, like fully formed sentences, and they know that these 15 steps can lead me to a desirable result, but they have no clue of what each step does or where it can be interchanged.
Yeah, they store it like the alphabet.
Yes.
And each meme is its own in memory.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting, it's very clear to me that at some point, something had to evolve to make it more efficient. This compression algorithm, even before creativity happened, probably. And I think you also go into that in your talk with the work of Steven Pinker, who kind of figure out. Yeah,
I thought, I don't know what happened. So this is like I'm just laying out the problem situation to you and your viewers. This is what I've been thinking about. There's a big jump going from dumb copying behavior to, as Deutsch says, seeing the purpose and going, oh yeah, that's what you're doing. And you copy the behavior at once, at least not always. I mean, sometimes it still takes a long time learning how to golf or whatever you need to. Then actually, that is a good example of where the exact way in which you grip the Nedlo or the banana or whatever, in this case the golf stick, matters. So if it takes quite a while. You don't take a golf lesson and the guy's like, well, just smash the ball and it will go into the hole. No, they have to learn the exact grips and then the swing and then your posture and all that. So this takes quite long. But for many things, a lot of what is being taught to a kid is actually already in the kid. So this notion of the stick as a pointy object is already there. You just go, okay, I'm using this to get it out. So I thought maybe this meme compression algorithm either is a kind of language or co-evolve with language. So this Daniel Everett thinks that language is much older than we thought it was, and it's actually about 2 million years old, and it kind of just points out or starts with icons and gestures and sort of very simple ways of assigning meaning to parts of the world and then communicating that with your hands or with an icon or maybe even a sound of that you could make even before you could speak. And the thing is, if you want to come up with these gestures, you have to come up with gestures that work across situations. If you do as the apes do, and for every new idea you come up with a new word, then you can't recombine them into new gestures, and you will have a very inefficient language. So in order to have an efficient language, you need to exploit hard to vary aspects of the world. This or that pointing is already a way to do that. It's like the object that is near me and the object that is over there. And
what do you mean with hard to vary in that sense?
Hard to vary is non-arbitrary. So if you're looking at your ape mom showing you how to use a stick, there are parts of that are easy to vary, which is like what part of the day it is, maybe, or even what material the stick is made of, or which direction she's facing, or whether she's wearing a hat or not. And then there are things that are hard to vary, which is the exact thing that's going on there with the stick. And if you want to parse that meme in a way that is useful to you, you want to preserve the parts that are hard to vary and basically throw away the parts that are easy to vary. And the primates, they store too much. You can tell by the way that they only use one end of the stick, is that they store a part that says, oh, use this end of the stick, where it's actually, that's an easy to vary because you can turn the stick around. And what they should have been storing is something like use pointy end, but they haven't made that jump yet.
Okay, yeah, I get it. Interesting.
So compression, generally speaking, exploits hard to vary.
Yeah, the non-arbitrary, the essence of what is important in a given situation, and it gets rid of the...
Yeah, right. So then I think of language as a kind of a compression algorithm for the world. And we can tell that language, as the language we're speaking now, is also repurposing a lot of basic physical description to express all sorts of wildly abstract ideas. So for instance, I can say, John went to the store because we needed groceries. And now there is a physical movement and a reason. But I can also say the meeting went past its deadline because issues piled up. And I'm using still physical language, but now I'm describing time. And I'm describing issues, which are problems, as things that are piling up, but they're not really piling up. How else would you express it? And another example I give is like the inheritance went to Rick's daughter by legal transfer through the bank because the will said so. And it's again, as these simple physical descriptions, but we're talking about possession and there's a path through the bank, but it never took a physical path. But that's the way we understand this. And I see this as our language exploiting hard to vary things about the world to have a compression essentially that allows us to explain everything in simple terms. And Steven Pinker did a lot of work on this. He's written various books on language. There's one where he thinks, or he lays out the idea that language is evolved and we can learn it much better when we are 6 or something. I'm not sure how well that idea is holding up, But there are other books that he has where he describes this called conceptual structure that's behind language, where essentially he turns language into semantic primitives. And these are a very finite list that you can essentially recombine, as I just did with basic English, into expressing all ideas. And there's, in the case of the stick, there's also taxonomy of objects, and a stick would be a one-dimensional rigid object. And if we're storing it like that, then turning the stick around has the same meaning. But if we're storing it as a very precise behavior, then we get into trouble. So essentially, so this is essentially saying that language or whatever happened, whether it's language causing it, or it's like a co-evolution, or language is the expression of this, but I see it as a kind of meme compression algorithm that exploits hard to vary properties of the world. Also, parts of language are more easy to vary than others. So for instance, you can add new nouns. So we're on a podcast. That's a word that barely exists for in my lifetime, and we can make a verb out of it because then we're podcasting now. But it's very hard to add a preposition. So you can say across a field. Can you also be a pit or something? No, it was difficult. And also pronouns. People have tried to add pronouns, but it's very difficult. But the language doesn't allow you to do it. And I think in this regard, we can consider the purpose of what's going on as easy to vary. So if you have a general meme compression algorithm in your mind that is looking for hard to vary aspects of what's going on, then we can parse the mother or father fishing for insects with a stick as using a sharp object to get something out of a hole that I can't reach into with my fingers. But if the purpose can be easy to vary, because, well, you can do that for all sorts of things. You can fish for various types of insects, but you can also use it to scratch yourself. And if you have a representation that leaves purpose open, or at least variable, then you can get to a point where you say, oh, that is what you're doing, because you have already stored most of what you're seeing. So if you're a child and you haven't stored every meme as a separate process, and maybe your father is teaching you how to use tools to fix your bicycle or fix the car or whatever, at some point you have stored what a tool does. It typically, like, okay, this tool turns screws around, and this tool smashes onto a surface, and you have these concepts. And then once your father's doing something new, you go like, oh, that's what you're doing, because you have these. And maybe it's difficult. I mean, there's some, I think we have to look this up, but there's some psychological research showing that people actually find it difficult to vary the purpose of what they are storing about. I think it's called something like functional fixedness. But at any rate, you can do it. You can do it by exploiting in your representation the hard to vary parts of the world. And another way in which I think if you do that, you could innovate even as an ape. Like maybe our first innovations were accidents. So if the meme gets, so Deutsch says we basically evolved creativity to learn culture that became too complex to store in the way that you store the alphabet. It just becomes too long. So you need a way to compress it. Otherwise you just get lost. So then the explanatory knowledge is, like, as you say, is, okay, these are the important parts that hang together. By doing that, you might accidentally innovate because just gets lost in your in your representation. You might lose which part of the stick is important, exactly. Or you might lose which part of your finger needs to be used because you've summarized it or explained it or compressed it. All these words are sort of related to me.
Yeah.
You've compressed it as apply pressure. And once you think of it as applying pressure, you no longer need your injured thumb.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're dropping easy to vary metadata, and you keep a compression, and then you can string together longer memes.
Yeah.
Because purpose is easy to vary, because you can use a stick for various things, and you can use many parts of your, and even the ways, once you have the purpose in mind, then the means to that end can vary. So you can have a stick which can be repurposed, but you can also have the end in mind, which is you want to apply pressure, and then you use another part of your hand, or you use your feet.
I think it's a really interesting concept, this compression, and you can also think of it in parallels to programming. It's very clear that it's a very primitive way to program by like hard coding functions that do everything.
Yeah,
in super long and verbose way, and just copy pasting every time the function. That's kind of what
but I think
chimpanzees are doing.
Even the apes are not entirely doing this, because they're not always saying, okay, and we need to face. They're already filtering out irrelevant details, so they're not always facing the same direction when they're doing the meme. They already have something that must have been involved, I guess, but they don't. They can be right-handed or other-handed compared to their parents, and they will switch hands, so they can mirror that.
Okay.
And I'm sure if their parents are wearing a hat, they might not wear the hat, but you don't. They might think that is related. At least if they see it once. If they see it once, you're not gonna. If you're learning how to fix a flat tire from your father, like the first thing you're gonna do when you want to copy him is not wear the same outfit or something.
No, it's not even do all of the same things in the same order. It's first understanding what every step does, or like, oh, what are you doing now? Oh, I'm unscrewing this.
Yeah.
Why is that necessary, etc. So the way humans learn it is indeed more this compressing or parsing very specific parts of the process and understanding those individually so that you can abstract it away and use it in multiple circumstances. In a computer program, we call it a variable, right? You store a variable and then you can use it or interchange it with other things multiple times. I think I find it hard to believe that genetic evolution wouldn't also eventually figure out these efficiency gains via compression, and that somehow indeed this could have led to explanation at some point.
Yeah. So the conclusion of my talk or my idea is that the jump is actually not that big for a child to say, oh, this is what you're doing, because they're already storing almost everything. So it's only the bit where they go, oh, okay, you're using the tool to do this now, that they need to get. It's all that's left.
Yeah. Yeah. And does it and the background knowledge, maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, right. If you're an ape and you're copying memes from your ape parents, it seems like these primates, they're copying every meme as is. So they have a repertoire of memes, but it's like meme 1, meme 2, meme 3. Whereas if you are learning from your father or mother what a certain tool does, then you have that as a separate bit of knowledge that can be recombined with other bits of knowledge in your repertoire. So you go like, okay, if you have the stick as a tough one-dimensional rigid object, then that is something there for you to, well, literally and figuratively pick up to use for certain ends. So you have what you can build up now is background knowledge. So separate memes aren't background knowledge, because if you still need to expend as much time as someone who doesn't have these pieces of background knowledge to learn a new meme, then it's not an advantage. It's basically your meme repertoire. But if you have recombinable bits where you have exploited hard to vary aspects of the world into useful bits of knowledge, then you can essentially recombine them. And this would allow you, and this is, I'm speculating here that if you get to a certain level of background knowledge, then new idea can be just one step away.
Right.
And there's an idea, a concept called the adjacent possible.
Yeah.
So saying that a new idea can be ready, and many ideas have been invented by researchers at pretty much the same time. So there's this paper who compiled already 150 or so cases in the 1920s. So Turing and Church came to computation at pretty much the same time. You have Leibniz and Newton for calculus. Darwin ended up publishing his ideas on evolution because he didn't want Wallace to be first. And this is pretty common. So perhaps at any given point, a new idea is just one recombination away or one change away.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, well, we know knowledge grows in this way, or we learn in this way. We construct our own body of knowledge and we build on top of our existing knowledge. As Popper says, everything is theory laden as well. So we're always interpreting information and explanations and innovations through our lens of what we already currently hold. And because this compression algorithm may have led us to store indeed a lot of these properties that we can use across multiple scenarios because they are hard to vary, that can have already given us a lot of background knowledge that aids the creative process, or at least can be an asset when considering what does this mean? Oh, based on these 9 things I already know, this is a logical next step or a quicker next step to infer. So I also like this part of your theory.
Yes. In my talk, I gave the example of how the printing press was invented, which was essentially just the combination of 3 ideas, which was what they had already been using screws as a mechanism that you can turn around to apply pressure. They were using it for the creation of pressing grapes. They're already using coin stamps, so they're using, okay, if I smash something in, I get something like an imprint. And they were already rearranging letters because they were writing, and they were also using letter seals. So this guy was like, what if I just apply that thing that applies pressure to create an imprint, and let's do it in a way that we can reorder it. So he created some kind of jump to universality there, because once you put these things together, you can print any book.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love also, there's this book called Range, and it also explains a similar concept, how a lot of the time innovation comes from people who are not burdened by the common view too much. So they're new to a field and they bring their own existing background knowledge from a completely different field. And then they start working on frontier level issues with the incumbents of that industry. And because they have just a completely different context, they are easier to come up with new ideas.
Yeah, so they're essentially doing what I'm suggesting, which is saying that basically general intelligence comes from general purpose. So they come from a field where they do certain things in certain ways, probably because it helps them in that field, come to a new field and they say, well, okay, I can repurpose the thing at my old field and just try it here.
Yeah. This is definitely...
So this is this kind of what if. And then it also ties in with the way that we've been discussing the Fun Criterion. It's just what if I just try this?
Yes.
I know I'm not supposed to do this because this thing is actually associated with maybe something in my old field, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Why not? Just going to repurpose this. Or just going to try.
Yeah, well, it doesn't even have to be deliberate rebellion. It's just I have no other way of interpreting it than using my current worldview. So that's the way I'm going to try to figure out how this works. And that's how new ideas enter the industry or the current body of knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's also why a lot of interesting ideas on AI and psychology come from computer scientists and physicists and biologists. And
I think there's even a leaderboard or some website where there's challenges of unsolved problems in industries or domains. They specifically look for people outside of the industry to find a solution. I'll link it in the description if I can find it. But this book Range is a really interesting one, and definitely helps to understand just the creativity and how it's useful to throw away the rules indeed and try to infer things yourself from scratch and hone this skill. It shows it a lot very well. The same goes, I think, for Elon Musk. He's now known for first principle thinking, and I know one interpretation of first principle thinking is using fixed axioms and building from there, but I think the more Deutschian interpretation of first principles is using fundamental explanations and building from there, or just understanding and from the ground up and trying to understand something this way instead of reverse engineering the current body in the industry or taking for granted the current knowledge in the industry.
I kind of interpret Elon Musk's way as extremely stubborn thinking. Okay, I haven't heard that this is impossible, so I'm just going to do it.
That, and also just take nobody's word for it, this nullius in verba. I'm not going to listen to what the current industry experts say, what is possible or not by cars. We're just going to figure it out from scratch and use engineering to do it, because why the hell not? We can do it.
Yeah, I remember reading some story about Elon Musk. I have no idea whether this was some fake motivational story or even about him, but it was something like he was starting SpaceX with a guy who he was super good at space stuff. And he quit because he was like, oh, what we're doing is impossible. You can't just do this with a startup. And he was later, of course, he succeeded. And maybe he succeeded because he was basically ignorant of the fact that he couldn't do it, which was a mistake. He could do it.
Yeah, I think what's the famous...
There's a kind of bravado that you can bring from one field to the next and say, well, if I figured that out. And well, this happens often, except for when they go into politics, then thing goes wrong.
Then it goes wrong.
Yeah.
Isn't there also the... Well, Trump
is a businessman.
Yeah, but isn't there also the inventors of electromagnetism? There were two guys, and one of them was just an engineer, had no actual formal training in theoretical physics. I just have to look it up.
Well, think about what we've been talking about with the art and the Fun Criterion. So you can innovate as an artist by saying, so you're throwing away the rule that you need to picture Jesus or have it be precise or whatever the rules of the time were, but you could also just not even know the rule. So you're breaking it for not knowing it exists. And that could be an advantage from coming somewhere from another field where we haven't learned a wrong rule yet.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
You're ignorant, but in a good way.
Exactly. And Deutsch even has this article about it where deliberate ignorance is valuable. For instance, like you don't want to watch the last 5 minutes of a movie because then you know how everything goes and it kind of ruins or spoils the whole experience. There's like a logical order to learn things in that keep you interested in the problem and keep you working on it. So that's also like a criticism against like the most efficient way to do things. Those are often not sustainable and therefore better to avoid them, actually. And this, I found it, is Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell. They were the ones who kind of came up with electromagnetism or the foundations of it. And Faraday was like the outsider. So he was a bookbinder's apprentice, no formal training. And he just was all about experiments, like building some electrical motors, etc. And because of him not being burdened by the theory, he was able to like make strides, and working in tandem with James Clerk Maxwell, they were able to formalize it and
right. So then
really
he could eventually go back with his wild ideas to Maxwell, and he said, okay, well, I'll formalize it in the way that it should be formalized in physics.
Yeah. And I think had Faraday been worried about the theoretical implication or how something it worked, it might have held him back. In the sense that he might not have experimented as much, because then he would have thought, oh, this is not possible, or this doesn't work this way, or this theory doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So that is kind of my sort of second interpretation of the Fun Criterion, which is essentially saying like, fuck the rules, just do it, just try it. But in Faraday's case, he didn't even know the rules apparently, so it's like.
So yeah, we've been talking about AGI, so the creativity algorithm, and one thing that we haven't touched on explicitly yet, but it is always a core component of it, is like consciousness. I like thinking of consciousness as the thing that helps us criticize and select what to do. So it's kind of it's a way to focus attention. But yeah, there might be more to it, and there likely is more to it. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on consciousness, the purpose of it, how it may have evolved. If you have any thoughts there.
Right. So I think on consciousness, I'm not sure who made the distinction. I think it may have been the philosopher David Chalmers, but there's a hard problem of consciousness and an easy problem of consciousness.
Okay.
And the easy problem isn't actually easy, but it's like where you think of it in functional terms. So why might we have something like a shared sketchboard where sound and vision and memories and bits of language and whatever integrates into let's say some worldview, or where we have working knowledge and so on. So you can think of why would we build that into a computer that does something intelligent. But we don't exactly know how, but this seems sort of a tractable problem, and that's why it's called the easy problem. And the hard problem of consciousness is the type that Sam Harris keeps going on about and calling there being someone home. So, I kick you in the face and you're actually in pain. Whereas I could build a little machine that if you touch it, it will say ow. But we know it's not immoral to slap this little machine just because it says ow, because what it's doing is some analogy to what we are experiencing, but it's not real.
Yes.
in the critical rational, it was a community, the jury's still out on whether animals have this sentience, qualia. It goes by different words. But so let's say this consciousness as there being someone home. I think this is a nice way of putting it for that Sam Harris put it. So I have no idea how this works. Usually people say it's a package deal, or people within the crit rat community say it's a package deal with creativity. And I have no theory on how it works, but I have a guess on why it has to be there. So David Chalmers has this thought experiment where he says, well, imagine a world that is physically similar to our world and is just like a parallel universe. Yeah, maybe we can call it that, like a parallel universe in which the whole world is the same and people behave the way that they do, except they don't have this sentience, qualia. Nobody's home. So you've got a world of robots that one of the questions is like, is this even conceivable? So I was thinking, well, suppose I were to be dropped into this world, and this would be a kind of, I would be the only conscious person that I'd have to figure out. How would I figure out? He never asked these questions as far as I can find from his writings, readings. But I was just thinking at night, like, well, how would I figure out whether I am in this world? This would be a kind of solipsism, but it's not that the world is in me, but I am the only person who is really alive. And I thought one way I would try to figure out is maybe I would go to the library and I'd see if there are any books on the hard problem of consciousness, because I think we can only have and talk about the hard problem of consciousness for the fact that we have that problem. So I thought further, well, okay, if they can't have books on the hard problem of consciousness because there's just something that they don't experience, then what else would be true of this world? And I'm inclined to think that in this world nothing would happen at all, because none of the rational beings in this world could ever justify doing anything. Imagine you have these kids and they go and ask these why questions. So you go like, oh, why do you come out of bed in the morning? And it's like, well, because I have to go to work. And they say, well, why do you go to work? Well, because I have to make money. Why do you have to make money? Well, to pay the bills. And you go on until at some point, well, if I don't pay the bills, if I don't pay rent, I would live on the streets, and that would be bad. This line of questioning has to end somewhere, and it ends in, and it can end somewhere because we have qualia. So at some point you can say, well, the fact that it feels bad is the explanation. It's otherwise you end up in an infinite loop. So the qualia is the way to halt this infinite regress. So starving is bad, and being extremely cold and out on the street is bad. And so this is kind of, I think of it as a ultimate grounding for reason, that if you put rational agents in a world without this kind of qualia, they would halt, because they would forever loop on this unanswerable question. And
Gotcha,
like even religious people don't have a different answer than to the meaning of life than it feels good, because okay, you go to heaven, but it's the same thing. Heaven's supposed to be nice, right? You gotta have to experience heaven, otherwise there's no point.
Yeah, I think this reminds me of the frontal lobotomy to stabilize mentally ill people in the 50s or 40s. There was like an experimental procedure to remove part of your
Isn't
brain.
This where they cut the brain in half? The corpus callosum?
To take a specific part of the frontal lobe.
I know there's a guy who had an injury where he lost a bit of his frontal lobe, and then
there's many cases of it, and they did that because that's kind of, I think that's where a lot of the affects live, like our emotional tuning and what we find good and bad. And if by taking it out, you become more stable. So if you're like a very erratic or bipolar person or schizophrenic, they tried doing this procedure on them to like chill them out. But what they noticed in very many cases, I think over 80%, they become logical because they're not emotional anymore, but they become also lethargic. They cannot make decisions. They become like paralyzed by options. They have no conception of like time constraints. So if you give them a menu with like 50 items to choose from, they will not be able to come to a conclusion.
I've heard the same thing about people without emotions. But then we still have to distinguish the emotions as, let's say, shortcuts to decisions, and the emotions actually being experience. So again, I could make a pretty simple program that has the emotion of being mad. Like if you turn it on too many times in a day, it will send you an email saying, stop doing that. I want peace. But still, again, there's nobody there feeling annoyed.
Yeah, true. I wonder, there needs to be someone there for the pain signal to have an effect.
So I think the emotions, like we touched on them earlier, I think they are kind of, let's say, in some sense, this valence and intensity is like this sort of evolved, maybe quick reactions to stuff. Where, okay, you see a tiger and there's a beating of the heart, sweating, and you just have an immediate sense of having to run away.
Yep. That's also how Rand puts it, I believe, in objectivism. They're like lightning snap judgments. That's what they're used
I think
for.
they even have a different neural pathway. So I'm not a neuroscience buff, but I think there are sort of dual or maybe even triple pathways in which these emotions go. And one is I think it's something like, I forget the details, but it's like it goes through the amygdala and then it's a quick, and then it has a slower pathway in which you actually get to deliberate, but you already have the impulse of doing something there, so you can essentially get yourself out of a dangerous situation fast. So you maybe have a reflexive response fast, and then just like maybe you think there is an insect on your arm, you go like, and then wait, it's nothing.
Exactly.
But I think these are part of the easy problem then. As I laid out earlier, it's like why would a system have this mechanism? I guess this would be the easy problem of emotions. So why would you have emotions? We say, well, okay, there are maybe quick assessments or something of a situation in a category good, bad, really good, something like that. Do more, do less. But to summarize, my idea is that consciousness has to come along for the ride for a rational being. Otherwise, they would halt. They could never justify doing anything. They might do, let's say, something for a little bit, but at some point, it's basically they get an existential crisis. Whereas I can ground my reasons. I can just say, okay, I'm going for a walk a little later. I don't need any reason other than liking the walk.
I'm trying to picture the hypothetical individual without consciousness or qualia.
Well, you would never be able to answer. You'd be stuck in that loop of questioning. You couldn't at some point just say, I'm going to achieve this because it feels good, or I'm going to avoid this because it feels bad. You wouldn't really, because you can't have the hard problem at all. So nobody's home. And because I know of myself that I have qualia, that I am home, I can stop the line of questioning. I can justify my action by saying, I just like it. We need to have qualia for a rational being, a person, to be able to function in the world. Otherwise, they could never find a reason to do anything.
But why? Because animals are rational in the sense that they're purpose-driven. They want to proliferate their genes, their robots, and their decisions are based on economical decisions.
We can use the word rational, or we can use the word reasoning, or we can use the word creative. I define rational as putting effort into finding truth. So animals wouldn't have the problem of them lacking qualia if they are not creative, because they wouldn't do this line of questioning.
They would be purely utilitarian otherwise.
No, they're just not thinking. If they're thinking, they would eventually realize there's no reason to do anything if they don't have qualia. But then they don't go through that loop. They don't go why. They just they just run their built-in algorithms. So then you don't need consciousness because you just run the program. So my ChatGPT doesn't need consciousness either. It just basically does the feed forward through the neural net and produces the output. But an agent that has some kind of plan isn't just executing an algorithm. It has to come up with reasons to do whatever it's going to do next. So if morality is what to do next, you couldn't answer anything without qualia. You can't say this is what we need to do next, because there's no grounding of the answer. So there wouldn't be morality in the sense it doesn't matter what you do to the person or animal that doesn't have qualia, but it also doesn't matter for the person itself what they do. There's no difference between them just lying in bed and not existing or lying in bed and spending the whole day doing something. It could never answer the question of what to do next. Whereas we can have some grounding with that. The thing I'm going to do next is the thing I like. So I'm probably just going to go for a walk after this podcast, and at some point I'm going to eat because I'm hungry, and I'm going to eat something that tastes good, and I'm not going to eat too much. And if you keep answering why aren't you going to eat too much, well, then I would get too fat, and I don't like that. At some point I'm going to just answer the question with I don't like it or I do like it.
So is it a correct summarization that the capacity to ask yourself what to do next requires affects? It requires feelings and emotions and conscious awareness of what you're doing, because there's nothing to base your actions on.
Well, you could answer what to do next with something, but if you continue this line of questioning, you could never stop if you have no qualia. Whereas I can stop. I can just say I just like it. Feels good.
Yeah. Well, yes. And I think the reason why it resonates with me is that point of in people that have this absence of emotional experience, or at least severely diminished, they tend to not do things. They tend to not see the meaning in things, and they tend not to prioritize time correctly. In that sense, I understand it. I never thought of it as also a prerequisite for morality.
I can imagine you having qualia and still have indecision, because maybe you're just endlessly deliberating on what it's like. Usually when I watch a movie, there's a movie I want to watch, but occasionally I'll scroll Netflix and I just get into this endless indecision where I'm scrolling Netflix for longer than I would even watch a movie, because I can never decide would I want this one or that one. I still have qualia. So I can imagine neurological damage that causes indecision while you still have qualia.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm not sure how these situations relate. It's conceivable that these people maybe don't have qualia. I don't know.
I think or at least severely diminished forms. I think there's a couple of examples. I'll put some links in the show notes to articles about it. I think there's a famous one in 1994 called Eliot. Yes. So we've been discussing critical rationalism and AI at length, and I think that's also something you enjoy doing with like-minded individuals like I do. You've organized a version of a critical rationalism get-together in the past.
Yes, so I went to the one in Philadelphia in 2023, and then in the spring of 2024 I did a RestFest Europe at my family home in France. And then maybe about 10 to 15 people showed up during the course of a week. Instead of the US version where there were a lot of talks, it was just more of a get-together with very informal bench talks and discussions at the dinner table. And recently, you and I have been floating the idea of doing this again, and perhaps more seriously and for a slightly bigger audience. And we are in process. Well, we're quite close to. It's likely going to be in May.
Yes.
In 2026, and almost certainly going to be in Oxford.
Exactly. We're now in stages of nearly locking it in and pitching it to the world. And we hope it's going to be a fun setup. So we want to make it about some talks as always, but also leave enough space for it to be like some casual socializing and just an all right nice atmosphere.
The pubs of Oxford might be good for that.
Yes. Oxford obviously is a beautiful town with a lot of culture. Not to diminish the beauty of Philadelphia, but I think we Europeans have a notch when it comes to
Philadelphia has a very, very beautiful old town.
Oh, do they?
It's gorgeous.
Sorry, look, Philadelphia is amazing. Oxford could never get to it.
Well, Oxford would be easy to reach for pretty much everyone, everywhere. Even if you fly from the US, you can fly into London from pretty much anywhere in the world for a good price.
True, and Oxford is really just less than an hour, maybe even a train ride from London, from the major airports.
Yeah, you take a bus from any airport, I think,
or a bus even. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can leave it up to your listeners and your watchers to suggest what they would like to see for a European version. Do you want to see only talks? Do you want to have different kinds of sessions? So like maybe workshops or interpretive dance? I don't know. But there's something about all-day talks that doesn't quite flow. I think often the talks are just an excuse to share an idea, and then you can have something to talk about after.
True. it can become a bit like
there
one-sided.
was another idea for poster sessions where you put up a poster and you put up some maybe controversial claim, and then you just do this kind of thing where you say, debate me or something like that.
Yeah. I think it's good. We will definitely try to get some things set in stone. Maybe you already set the date.
What I
and
thought would be
location.
fun is if you put all the talks on Dennis's website, and then instead of having a Q&A that lasts only like 3 minutes, you have a prolonged discussion online. So the talk is just a way of maybe eliciting a discussion.
Right. Yeah, indeed. So there's a follow-up to it. There is...
So and then the talk doesn't have to make a specific point. It could also just say, oh, this is interesting to think about. What's your idea?
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's got all good ideas. We're going to get creative with it and find some fun ways to get together and hopefully do this structurally as well. To just keep it as a recurring thing. I think that would be very nice and welcome addition to the critical rationalism spaces.
Yeah, we'll try to space it so that it's as far away from Logan's event in time as possible, should it happen again. So I initially wanted to do it in autumn or this autumn, but I didn't want to take away possible visitors from Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's a good
which has a beautiful old town.
All right. So on that note, big news coming soon, hopefully. European Red Fest. We're going to try to finalize the dates and then share more information as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for joining me today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Yes. And learned a lot, discussed a lot, but also more confusion coming up always is a good sign of a good conversation where you have new open ends that pop up. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was nice talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dirk.